Good morning and welcome to another edition of the Kitchings Table. I'm your host, W.O. Kitchings. Today, pretty in-depth topic we're going to talk about, and I thought I would start off today's session, this episode, with that quote by one of our most iconic leaders of our time in our country, Malcolm X. And as he stated, I'm for truth, no matter who tells it. I'm for justice, no matter who it is for or against. I'm a human being first and foremost, and as such, I'm for whoever and whatever benefits humanity as a whole. So, what we're talking about today is the teaching of our own history. Task force that is started, and also talking about freedom schools and the academies under that. So, when we talk about teaching our own history, anytime you're teaching something of your own, it's very personal, in my opinion. It's personal from the standpoint that you are either living it, have lived it, know of it, read about it, seen it firsthand, have seen documentaries about it, seen movies to tell true stories about it. But when you're teaching your own, as I stated, it's a little bit more personal, and you go into it from a different perspective and with a lot more depth, definitely with a lot more feeling. And as you provide that history to your children, to young adults, to older adults, it doesn't matter. We can all learn from history at any point in our lives, and no matter what that history is, as long as it's, as Malcolm said, truth, as long as it's dealing with the truth, then we're fine. So as we're talking about this today, I want you to keep in mind that when we're talking about teaching our own history, we're talking about what's in the best interest, what's good for us, and who really should be teaching us our own history. Because when you leave it up to others to teach something that you should have firsthand knowledge of, they may leave some things out. They don't always get it correct. They've got a different perspective. They may have a different slant or viewpoint as to what they want to share. And it's important that we have individuals, especially teachers, who embrace and embark on teaching our own history. And it doesn't have to just be Black history. It can be any culture's history. When you think about those civilizations who have been around for thousands of years, the cultures in Asia, the cultures in Europe, the cultures in Africa who have been around for thousands of years, you want to get it right. You want to make sure you're telling it right. So when those cultures are telling their history, they want to make sure that they're getting it right. They don't want, or they prefer not to have that history told by someone outside of the history. It's better when it's told from those inside the walls, inside the books, who've experienced it, who've lived it, who've seen it. So we talk about that. And as we do, it's interesting that when we talk about education in America and the truth and the justice of it, Black people learning, being educated, was not something that was always wanted or put in play for Black people to become educated, to learn, to be able to read. And even in this day and time, reading with understanding, because you can read words and not understand them. But when you read words, you know what words means. And when you put them collectively together to make a thought, to make a sentence, to make a statement, to make a story, to just make something powerful in a speech, it tells you how much power there is in the power of words. So when we talk about knowledge and education in this country, the knowledge part is gained sometimes through storytelling, most times through reading of books. And you must have writers to write books. And you must know the words in order to write the books. So when I say that Black people in this country have always had to fight a very difficult battle for becoming educated, because as long as you can keep a person ignorant of knowledge, ignorant of knowledge, ignorant of education, then those who are in control will keep control. And I believe that's been the fundamental reason why education was kept away from Black people. And even in today, in 2024, our children struggle, not all children, but a good portion of them struggle with education and learning, because sometimes they aren't always provided or given or taught the way they understand or they can embrace. You know, when a child is growing up from the time of a toddler till about fourth grade, they are like sponges. They want to soak it all in, they want to know it, they want to learn it. And then as they get older, some of them, if they did not have a good experience or they're not applying themselves to learning, they start to become disengaged. And when they become disengaged, they become distractions. And that is the one thing that we do not need when we're teaching our children about who we are. We don't need them to be distracted. We don't need them to be disengaged. We need them to be 100% engaged, plugged in, and turned on. So, as we continue this fight for teaching and learning and getting education without it being minimized or being told that, well, you don't know anything, or you didn't go to a school that provided you with a certain level of knowledge or education. We have to tear down those barriers and tear down those mindsets and tear down those thoughts, because they just aren't true and factual. So from the time of Brown versus the Board of Education, where you seek opportunity of equality, until 1965, I mean, learning has just seemed to always been one of the things that we have to fight for. And I recall in elementary school, when you would go to get promoted to the next grade and you would start that school year off and you would get your books. Unlike today, kids don't get issued books per subject. Imagine being in elementary school and you had 4 books that you took home every day and brought back to school. You had a math book, you had a reading book, reading English book, you had a science book. You had those books and you took them home so you could read and learn and keep abreast and study. Nowadays, it's left up to handouts. The books are passed out in the class and collected, so it's not as much engagement. So when the child gets home, if the parent does not see that student reading, then they don't quite worry like, you know, my parents and parents of my generation, where, you know, if you couldn't understand something, you could take the book to your parent or your sister or brother, whomever, and ask them to help you understand it. But nonetheless, we're talking about teaching our own history. But in 65, ironically, I didn't know this till I pulled it up. On November the 8th, 1965, I should have been celebrating that because that's my birthday. Legislation was signed into United States law by then President Lyndon B. Johnson. And he called it Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, which was a domestic agenda. And he signed this bill, which was intended to strengthen the educational resources of our colleges and universities and to provide financial assistance for students in post-secondary and higher education. Increase federal money given to universities, create scholarships, give low-interest loans for students, and establish a national teachers corps. A national teachers corps. Keep that title in mind. And it was covered under Title IV of the Health Education Administration. I'm sorry, the Higher Education Act. And it was reauthorized in 68, 72, 76, 86, 92. So it seems like basically every 4 to 6 years, this act has to be renewed. And Congress can make changes to it. But the reauthorization, Congress amends additional programs, changes the language and policies of existing programs, or make changes. Lyndon Johnson, former President Lyndon Johnson, a Democrat from Texas. And when you think about Texas in today's time, it's like, wow, you had a great guy like this who was fighting for change. He was about a lot of change during his presidency, and a lot of change, social change, civil changes happened under his presidency. And I don't think we always give him the credit he deserves, because it was during his time that many of the social and educational changes that we have today have come about. So because there was the Higher Education Act passed in 1965 to ensure that colleges and universities could use federal funds to get funds to help with scholarships and things of that nature, it allowed an expansion of teaching a different subject matter. So when we talk about changing subject matter, because there are those politicians or those individuals of the higher learning perspective, from those individuals who may be extremely embracing charter schools, they would prefer some of our history not to come to the forefront, so that it seems like it's not factual or actual when it really is. So there has been a decision, at least in Florida, whereby a group, a task force, has been brought together to organize what they call the Teach Our Own History Task Force. And the Reverend Dr. Carl Johnson, the president of the General Baptist Convention Incorporated, is demanding that the governor of Florida and the DOE, Department of Education, teach Black history accurately, factually, and forthrightly. And he went on to say, teach it in the spirit of Dr. King. Teach it in the spirit of Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who is the founder of Negro History Week that was expanded to Negro History Month. And don't idly, don't we sit by and idly allow the system to miseducate Black people. Teaching our history each and every day. So this task force will present to the government a comprehensive curriculum that correctly and effectively teaches African and African American history to students in Florida's public schools. Moreover, with the idea, the concept of developing 40 plus what they call freedom schools by the year 2025, because they are not going to sit by and let the governor of the state of Florida minimize, erase, do away with Black history accurately and factually because you feel it may hurt other people's feelings or you don't believe it is being portrayed accurately. And in my opinion, it is important that people write books about who they are, what they have done, what they've seen, what they've learned. Because when you talk about yourself forthrightly, then you can do some things to move the needle forward. So the Teach Our Own History Task Force is also engaging the New World African Studies as a part of their concept to help teach history of Black Americans in this country and to teach it from whence it began to now. And I recall going into elementary school a few years ago, and they had the historical Black figures and pictures on the walls of people like Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, George Washington Carver. And it struck me, here we are in the 21st century, and with no disrespect to those people who lived and died, shed blood, and made sacrifices for us to be at this point. But do we not have newer, iconic figures who are moving the needle forward in the fight for justice and freedom in this country? Are we still talking about people from the 1800s, and here we are in 2024? That must be moved forward. We must put up the individuals and names of those individuals who are doing things now, who have done things in the last 25 years, 30 years, to make their contributions important. So as we talk about teaching our own history, this task force wants to put in place things that will help you know who, what, when, where, how about the topic of slavery, since slavery seems to be one of the topics that some folks feel that, well, we haven't, slavery was a benefit. Here's a man whose ancestors did not live in slavery, who does not have to deal with the fact that he gets scrutinized, he gets challenged, he has opportunities that aren't always presented to Black people and other people of color. But you want to say slavery helped Black people and it, benefited them. Or you want to say that this country, one presidential candidate is stating that this country has never been racist, although uh, when it comes out that you are a person of brown persuasion, whereas you weren't really seen like that before, you want to talk about what isn't. Slavery happened. It happened for a reason. It did some things that were not very pretty for this country. If you can talk about the Holocaust and the ugliness of the Holocaust, you can talk about the ugliness of slavery. Don't minimize slavery and build up the Holocaust. Slavery was just as terrible, but because it is not perpetrated against European Americans or Jewish people, because it was perpetrated against Black people who were thought to be less than a man, which is crazy. You don't want it to be known. You don't want perhaps maybe your ancestors to be caught up in the mix of information that comes out that, well, they were slave owners. Well, some of the presidents of the United States of America, those first 5 or 6 guys, were slave owners. Washington was a slave owner. Jefferson was a slave owner. I don't hear anybody disputing that. I've never heard anyone dispute that fact. So we want that to be taught. That's what they're striving. And they want to acknowledge, as Africans, we have sovereign or weren't sovereign many royalties, and discovered the scattered Africans in the New World, which America is considered the New World. Cultivate a common consciousness, identify and advance narratives and testimonies of your own story. Get wisdom and understanding to rebuilds our spiritual, educational, and entrepreneurial systems. And those last two are definitely key components of what the freedom schools will be about, and this task force of teaching our own history. Understanding to rebuild educational and entrepreneurial systems. To understand the status quo and to take appropriate actions favorable to our community, to develop informed visionary leaders who can in turn build their people's self-sufficiency and self-reliance. All these things are important. They bring out many critical and interesting facts about what we need to be moving toward. And then they have 7 objectives that the Teach Our Own History Task Force is putting in place. And again, they are looking to have at least 40 what they call freedom schools in place by 2025. And if there can be charter schools, if there can be schools that are part of some churches, and they have their schools and they're developing their schools, then the same can be had for something like freedom schools. So the objectives of the Teaching Our Own History Task Force are these: to encourage the accurate and unbiased teaching of African American history, culture, experiences, and invaluable contributions, not only in the state of Florida, but throughout the nation. 2, to develop strategies and solutions to support and strengthen public education in marginalized communities. 3, to develop and adequately support 40 Freedom Academies across the state of Florida. Now, of course, just like charter schools have become part of American educational landscape over the past 20 years, 30 years to be exact, starting with the KIPP schools. And we're going to talk about that in the second half of our show, those programs and things that have been put in place to help a culture know more about education, to help them learn, to educate them perhaps from a different perspective, to teach them better, So these Freedom Academies are looking to develop and be supported. Number 4, to create significant after-school programs for students in Title I schools in marginalized communities across the state of Florida. using an age-appropriate African American history curriculum to strengthen reading, writing, and math skills. Reading, writing, and math skills are critical skills to our children in the early developmental ages between grades 1 through 5. When we look at the number of Black boys in those grades who, for whatever reason, do not do as well in reading, writing, and math, my experience has been that you must find different ways to connect to them in order to engage them for teaching them. Math can be one of the most fun subjects you will ever want to realize, but you have to provide it in a maybe non-traditional way, or a way that engages, or a way that is more relative to what's going on in their lives, or just teaching them life lessons about math that apply. I was thinking the other day that when I was in high school, and even in junior high school, we had vocational shop classes that we took. We had woodwork, we had metal shop, we had, I think, some type of technical drawing. And those classes, for the most part, seem to be good hobby, if you will, type classes. And because they were taught from a perspective of maybe not of hobby and not career, then the emphasis on utilizing the skills that could be gained from those classes were not really put to the forefront. And then the other day, as I'm writing and I see a business that specializes in sheet metal work, it made me think about the sheet metal class in high school. If you're going to teach children certain subject matter, teach them where the benefits will come in life. If you're going to teach me woodwork, teach me what woodwork can do for me later on in life. Maybe I want to be a carpenter. Maybe I want to build cabinets and shelves, or maybe I will enjoy building and designing furniture, all part of woodwork. From metal shop, learning how to make things, fabricated pieces out of metal, which requires not only soldering, but welding metal pieces together to teach or to make a career, to have a profession in those areas. Because if you don't teach me the long, gain of these classes, then I'm back to thinking the only way I can, make a difference is maybe through academics. And thank goodness we have organizations like the Job Corps that teach vocational subject matter. Having vocational classes in high school when I was coming up, under the name VICA, Vocational Industrial Classes of America. That's the only thing I can think of. But they taught guys how to fix cars, how to fix refrigerators and air conditioners, the vocational things. There's nothing wrong with a vocational job. Plumbers make $25, $30 an hour. Electricians can make up to $50 an hour. And in this day and time, when one of these service guys come out, they've already got it planned out. So there is the hourly rate that you will pay, and then there is a fee for the service call. Even if they're only there for 10 minutes, you're going to get charged a service call fee. And then if they have to do work, even if they only do 30 minutes of work, they're going to charge you for the hour. So these types of jobs, you see, when you call a repair service, who shows up to your door most times? Who does that person look like? Does it look like you most of the time? Do they have the businesses out here doing all this work? Because if vocational teaching Black kids, the vocational part of it, or you know, and then they aren't able to utilize it to operate businesses, then there's a feeling of connecting the two parts together. But the next time you call a service person, unless you call them specifically because you know a Black service company to do your air conditioning or your heating system or your electricity or your plumbing, just randomly pick one. Go to Angie's List, as they say, and pick one and see who shows up at your door. Teaching our children vocational crafts is not a bad thing, especially if they have a propensity to want to do that. We're here at the halfway point of the Kitchings Table today. I'm your host, W. Earl Kitchings, and it is our pleasure to bring you topics of interest and importance. Sometimes fun, sometimes not so much fun, sometimes thought-provoking, but whatever we're trying to bring to you, let me tell you, we're always bringing it to you with bettering ourselves in mind. So we're going to go back to our topic today, which is teaching our own history. And this task force of teaching our own history is making some strides in this. They started this this past year, and they want to have about 40 academies called Freedom Academies in place by 2025. And a couple of more of their objectives. They want to create summer freedom schools to teach youth the importance of African-American contributions, self-respect, personal responsibility, all with African-American contributions. Self-respect, personal responsibility, and contributions. Number 6, to empower and encourage the 3 private HBCUs in Florida. Well, I would say extend it beyond that. Teach all the HBCUs to develop a laboratory school on their respective campuses. Well, you can already take Florida A&M out of that because they do have one, but to have a laboratory school, there are only a few HBCUs that have laboratory schools. I can only think of, the only other one I can really think of is Southern University, which has a lab school on their campus. But what better way to connect education to our children, having a school right there on the campus of a college. And finally, to create partnerships with foundations, businesses, philanthropists, to support programs and events that consistently celebrate the contributions of African-American history or Black history, culture, Black literature, Black faith, and Black heritage. And I'll just add a couple of more things into that: entertainment and sports. Well, entertainment and sports are one and the same. So not to think that this is something new when they talk about freedom schools, because freedom schools actually opened the first week of July 1964, and it had approximately 250 freedom schools. Volunteer teachers attend one-week training sessions at Western College for Women in Oxford, Ohio. The original plans was about 25 freedom schools and 1,000 students by the end of the summer, with a total of 41 schools to open with about 2,500 students. They had already done that. They were established with help and commitment of local communities who provided various buildings for schools and housing for the volunteer teachers. I don't think they need to go that route. But they had already started this concept. So for the Teach Our Own History Task Force to talk about freedom schools, the concept is, what is this? 60 years old this year, 60 years old. Then you had the Philadelphia Freedom Library, which was funded by John Churchville in 1964. And it was founded to help with the education of educators. And one of the books that they put out or supported was What Black Educators Are Saying, that was edited by Nathan Wright, published in 1970. Then there are the Learning for Justice organization of cities that are going to be a part of this whole concept, we hope. And then we have again, the freedom schools are going to be a large part, but then the Learning for Justice seeks to uphold the mission of the Southern Poverty Law Center to be a catalyst for racial justice in the South and beyond, working in partnership with communities to dismantle white supremacy, strengthen intersectional movements, and advance the human rights of all people. Going back to what Malcolm X said, being for whoever and whatever benefits humanity as a whole. And through this learning for justice, what they're hoping to do is to they want to support missions by focusing their work on educators, students, caregivers, and communities in these areas of culture and climate, curriculum and instruction, leadership, family, and community engagement. Now, let me go back to what I brought out in that piece about the Higher Education Act when they came out with the Teacher Corps or the National Teacher Corps. This was a way to improve elementary and secondary teaching in predominantly low-income areas. Now, if you allow teachers to teach students from the first perspective of teaching students who maybe look like them to help embrace their self-confidence, that's one thing. So the National Teacher Corps was a way to try to put teachers in these schools. From there, it has evolved into what we now know as Teach for America. Now, here's where everything gets interesting, because Teach for America, KIPP, charter schools, they all operate somewhat from a same platform. Nonprofit organizations whose stated mission is to enlist, develop, and mobilize as many as possible of our nation's most promising future leaders to grow and strengthen the movement of educational equity and excellence. Okay. The organization aims to accomplish this by recruiting and selecting graduates from top universities around the United States to serve as teachers. The selected members, known as core members, commit to teaching for at least 2 years in a public charter K-12 school in one of 52 low-income communities that the organization serves. So you heard me read that part about enlist, develop, mobilize most promising educational future leaders to grow and strengthen the movement for educational equality. And then they hit you with the bottom line. In one of the 52 low-income communities that the organization serves. Now, the Teach for America was founded in 1989 by Wendy Kopp. And this was based on her undergraduate thesis. And it was also helped along with an investor, Whitney Tilson, former commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, Douglas Schumann, and president of and CEO of Knowledge is Power program, Richard Barth. Knowledge is Power program, KIPP. Now, I'm not totally 100% for charter schools, simply because charter schools tend to take funds away from public education schools. And the accountability, more importantly, of the teachers are the issue that are one of the issues I have, because they don't have to do what teachers who work in public schools have to do. They just don't. They don't have the same oversight, the same certification that's required. So you have Teach for America trying to find teachers to put in the low income schools. You have KIP, who developing uh, schools across this country to help in areas where they're low income. And it's kind of an overlapping, you know. And then when you hear that charter schools are driven by making not for profit, but they are driven by making money. And then you talk about that making money is off the communities that serve low income communities. It kind of dilutes the whole concept. However, for a child to get an education, no matter where it is great. And make sure that when you're giving them this education, you're teaching them from A to Z, factually and concisely. You're giving them all the information. You're teaching them everything they need to know. Don't skip a step. Don't leave things out, even if it's painful. Because again, if you can teach, if you can make movies, if you can have celebrations of one of the most horrific human tragedies ever to be known to mankind, the Holocaust, then you can talk about and teach the negativity of slavery. And in going forward, talking about Knowledge is Power program, or KIP. KIP schools now operate since 2019. They have 224 schools, and that can be seen throughout some very major cities and maybe not so many major cities. But they have offices in San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and Washington, D.C. KIP was founded in 1994 by Mike Feinberg and David Levin. They were two Teach for America members, and they thought that the concept was good, so let's springboard something that we can utilize. And they did this after they did their 2 years with Teach for America, and it's been going forward ever since. So now in 30 years, KIP serves a low-income student demographic of nearly 100,000 students across 224 schools. Historically, the primary method they use is to determine family income through individual household applications for free and reduced price school meals. Who does that sound like? So once again, we can do our own thing. We can teach ourselves, but we must be engaged. So as these freedom schools from the Teach Our Own History Task Force take root here in Florida, we look for them to take root throughout the country, because they're going to be necessary if this pattern of minimizing Black history is going to be the way of the country from some aspects of politicians and educators. Let's teach it all. Let's teach it rightly. Let's teach it fairly and justly. And if you don't want it to be in the schools that are funded from the taxpayers who are Black, you want black taxpayers to pay, but you don't want their children to learn, then we have to teach our children ourselves. And if we have to teach them in freedom schools and or in our churches, then that's what we'll have to do. Because this mindset of believing that the woke and all the things that are under that umbrella are to minimize people or make other people feel hurt, or to minimize their feelings. Take everybody's feelings into account when you start talking about how you're going to do this. Make sure everybody, let's bring everybody to the table. Let's discuss it and let's make it happen. That's my feelings about it. So go forward, Teach Our Own History Task Force, bring these freedom schools to life, and let's get to the business of ensuring that our children learn all they can at a very high level, because we know that when we learn at a very high level, we definitely make an impact and bring about change. So that being said, I'm going to bring in my co-host with her Black History moment right now. And Ronleen, uh, I look forward to this task force here in Florida going forward and doing some important things. And it only bears out when you talk about some of the people that you share history about and knowledge of. It only bears out that it shows who we are and what we can do when we are given the opportunity and the fair opportunities and fair chances to do what we can do as educated people. Ronleen, good morning again.
Good morning. All right. So I want to first, before I comment on, I want to comment on your segment that you've done. It was an excellent job that you've brought forth and thought provoking, as in we need to start teaching in our churches. We need to start teaching in our schools. And we need to, as you said, put out that task force that it has to be done. If it's not going to be done in our homes, it has to be done
Hey,
somewhere.
Ronleen,
Yes.
we don't have to just teach in our homes, churches, schools. Anytime you engage a child, that's a teaching opportunity.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Every time you engage it, from the smallest thing to the largest thing. And when you're taking that moment to teach, help let them know why you're teaching and emphasize the importance of being educated. Emphasize that. Why it's important to be educated. I'm sorry.
No, no apology is needed here. So the person that I want to do our Black History acknowledgement is getting a lot of buzz, and her name is Captain Rimoshay Nelson. She was born in 1988 in November, and she became one of the 12 African American um, that of the Thunderbirds for the United States Air Force. She He, she was one of the people during COVID-19 when the former President Trump ordered them to do the flyovers for our essential workers, as well as everybody that was on the first line, especially the nurses, those that were still serving in the hospital to serve these people who was affected by COVID-19. Many of you know, many people died as of COVID-19 during that pandemic. And as I said, she was one of the 12 African Americans that served in that squadron. Now, she was the only African American woman. Can you imagine that in 2020, in 2020, the only African American woman from the inception of the Thunderbirds in 1953. So that tells you we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And I just want to mention that she is a graduate of Howard University, and she is a member of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority. So go out there and listen to Josh Mercer's interview with her. He's also a graduate from Howard University, and you will learn a lot about her. And I'm going to turn this over to our host, W. Earl Kitchens, for the Kitchings Table.
Well, Ronleen, let me tell you, first of all, anyone who can fly a jet is a very intelligent person.
Yes. And she was driven. She was driven from a
No,
child.
no pun intended. She was driven. She wasn't flown. She was driven. Oh, okay. So, so anyone who can fly and aircraft, but especially a fighter jet. Some that piece of equipment that costs millions of dollars. And then anyone who can become an astronaut, those are very intelligent people, highly intelligent people, because you're having to deal with some things to accommodate flying an aircraft at speed. Uh, and that is no easy task. But for her to be driven as much as she was, for her to have that burning desire, I want to be a pilot of a jet plane or in the military of our country, to be a fighter, uh, jet fighter pilot. Hats off to her, Captain Nelson. Hey, you are, you know, at the top of your game, and congratulations. Thank you for being an inspiration and a motivation for uh, other Black girls and women who desire to reach that level. Uh,
And I just want to say, she does have a scholarship for the Douglasville County High School where she attended, because she wanted people, the girls there, to be inspired, to let them know that they can do this too. She doesn't have to be the last African American woman as a captain in that space. Anybody. She wanted to open up that for anybody. So I thank you, because you said it earlier. Number one, math can be fun. When it's taught correctly, math can be fun. And it's a lot of math that goes into being an astronaut and being a fighter pilot, or just being able to leave the ground, period.
no doubt, no doubt. And there's a lot of math that goes into creating and building an aircraft.
Yes.
A lot of math. It has to be precise and exact. There you can't miss. Be off by, even a millimeter or centimeter can make a
Yeah.
difference. So,
If I
and
had to go
math.
out to every aircraft mechanic,
Hey,
I
they just
thank God
witnessed
for
that.
you.
Yeah, they just witnessed that the door of a plane blowing off because they felt like maybe the boats weren't in there. Okay, that's not a good thing. So, Captain Nelson,
We
Air
salute you.
Force Thunderbirds. The Thunderbirds are the equivalent of the United States Navy Blue Angels. So to fly those jets in formations and to do the types of things they do, great thing, great thing. So, well, Ronline, thank you so much for bringing that to us today. I look forward to your Black History moments every week, because you probably bring out some people and individuals that we don't hear about. We hear about the mainstream, but when you get off the mainstream road and you get on that other road to sharing who's out there and doing things, it opens your eyes and opens your head. And I know that me sharing something with you recently about a scientist that I'm sure you'll bring the light in one of our shows. Uh, it's always amazing when we hear that Black people had something to do with some inventions or something that came out, but they never got the full credit. They got minimized. Like, oh, you forgot to mention that other guy was the guy that really, did that. I mean, it's done on purpose. I know that much. It's done on purpose. It's systematically done to minimize, to make you believe that you are invalid or you're invaluable. But we must rise above that, and that's why I thought bringing this thing about teach our own history is important, because we must realize that we are from people who came from royalty and have a lot to offer if you just give us the opportunity. So thank you again for bringing that to us.
My pleasure.
So that's going to do it today for the Kitchings Table. We appreciate you joining us. We hope that you'll join us next Tuesday morning here at 10 a.m. for another episode. We're always glad to be with you. So for Ronline Kennedy, I'm Earl Kitchings. And as we say every week, go out and do something good for somebody else today. Until next week, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.